Hey, hey, it's Zakia Larry Live. It looks so different right now than what you're used to seeing, right? Absolutely. It's nighttime. I'm here in Los Angeles, and it's not just about the glitz and the glamour, people. There's some incredible political work being done here. So I'm going to give you a sneak peek into what I've been doing all day here in LA. I've talked to two incredible leaders of two organizations that are shaping our nation, starting with millennials, college students, really making sure that people have the proper IDs so that they can vote. And what we're going to talk about is that white space between what happens when you register and being able to cast the ballot. Millions of people fall out of commission during that white space. We're going to talk about if you are in that space, if someone you know is in that space, and what we're going to do about it. So stay tuned to hear about all of those things from Rock the Vote and Spread the Vote, my friends Jen and Kat.
You wanna do it right, you can do it right now. You can change your life. If you wanna do it right, you can do it right now. Come on and change your life. Zakia Larry Live in the building.
I'm so excited. I'm right here in LA, and I'm talking to two incredible minds behind two major organizations that are shifting literally the nation's landscape. Does that sound dramatic? A little bit, because here's why. It's true. And I'll tell you exactly what I mean in just a minute. They're laughing because they get it. So I'm talking to Kat Calvin. She is the founder of Spread the Vote, and Jen Tolentino. She is the director of policy and civic tech with Rock the Vote. So I'm pretty sure you're clear on what we're talking about today, right? But here's what's so critical, and ladies, we were having a chance to chat about this a bit earlier. Voting is a huge issue, but there are so many layers to it. And your organizations do two very different things. So today I want to get into the intersection of politics and pop culture. But I also want to get into that white space between urging people to register and yay, cast your ballot. And I heard it's not that easy, right? Kat's laughing, so you know I gotta come to you first, Kat. Let's talk a little bit about, one, give us a tidbit about what Spread the Vote does, but what do you do, and why is that white space? Why did that make you have a bit of a reaction here?
Sure, anyone who follows me on Twitter knows because I'm screaming about it all the time. So Spread the Vote helps people get IDs in voter ID states. 34 states around the country require some form of identification to vote, and 21 of those states require specific types of government-issued photo ID. So a driver's license, a passport, it varies by state. But 21 million eligible voters across the country don't have government-issued photo ID. So if they live in one of those states, they can't vote. And getting an ID is actually kind of challenging. It's expensive, it requires a lot of time and documents and transportation, etc. So we help people get those IDs that they used to vote, but they also use them for jobs and housing and medical care and all of the things you pull an ID out, of your wallet for every day.
Right.
But then on top of that, they can't vote without one. The reason I'm laughing is because we are in that white space.
Yeah.
So we have a huge focus on voter registration in this country, and it's great. Every state except North Dakota requires voter registration. We have to vote. But there's a big gap between voter registration in each state and voter turnout. So actually, in most states, between 70 to 80, 85% of people are registered to vote, but between 50 and 68 or so percent of people actually turn out to vote.
Wow.
And depending on the size of the state, that's hundreds of thousands to millions of people who are registered but not turning out. And that's because there's a lot that goes into being able to vote after you're registered. First of all, you have to have an ID if you live in one of those states. You have to have transportation, which is tough for people, and especially because we're seeing more and more states reduce the number of polling stations, the number of precincts, so that getting to where you vote is a lot more difficult than it used to be when you could, walk from your house or maybe drive somewhere really close by. But then also voter education is a huge piece. Voting is really confusing. We actually have incredibly low voter turnout in Los Angeles, partially because you open up the ballot and it's 40 pages of judges and ballot measures and all of these things that are really confusing. And since we don't teach civics anymore in this country, nobody knows what these things are. Nobody knows what the Board of Supervisors does or what this really confusingly worded ballot measure is. And so a lot of people, they want to vote, but then they open up the sample ballot or their mail-in ballot and they realize, oh my God, this is really confusing. Right. So there are a lot of pieces in between registration and turnout, which is why those those numbers vary so widely, and there's millions and millions of people across the country who are registering to vote and then getting lost.
Oh my gosh. I call that the deer in headlights syndrome. You see so much coming at you, you just stop.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Jen, let me hear from you on this, because Kat touched on also a domino effect, right? If you don't have the ID, you can't do a number of things that we do every day, but especially register to vote. But after a little bit of research, I found out this domino is getting tipped really early with some younger populations that may surprise people. So talk to us a little bit about who does not have access to these IDs, and it may be surprising. It's starting maybe in high school now.
Yeah, and to be clear, you don't necessarily need an ID to vote or to get registered to vote, but in a number of states you actually need one to cast a ballot. And so that's sort of where we work really closely with Spread the Vote, so that in instances where there's states like Texas and Georgia where we're registering voters, but we know through the registration process that they don't have the ID they're going to need to actually vote, we send them over to Spread the Vote to make sure that they're prepared. So that's kind of the way that we're trying to do really big outreach to a lot of people to register them to vote, but then make sure they're actually prepared on election day as part of that partnership. But when you look at the demographic of people that are beginning to not necessarily have the ID that's going to be required to cast a ballot, young people these days aren't necessarily getting driver's licenses in the same rates that they did when they turned 16 and then they're ready to go. A lot of people don't really get one potentially until they turn 21 because there's not a need that they can see where they have to have one.
Right.
And Kat mentioned you don't necessarily know that it's an option to get a state issued ID, that you can go to the DMV and do that. There might not be any reason for you to even take those steps because nothing in your life is requiring you to do so until you show up to vote. And all of a sudden you don't know. Wow. So it's sort of, this generation is changing the way that they interact with government and they interact and require IDs, but then they're also creating this cycle of now IDs are being required for access to democracy in a way that hasn't really been a thing before. So it's interesting. To Kat's point earlier as well, we also do a lot of work around how do you make it easier to understand what's going to be on your ballot.
Absolutely.
So creating digital voter guides on here's everything you're going to need. Here are the candidates' stances on some of the issues that we know young people care about. So what are you potentially, if anything, going to do in relationship to climate change? Do you, what are you going to do around women's rights or access to healthcare? And the answer could be nothing. Or it could be, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. We just sort of present the questions and allow voters to identify with what candidates represent their issues in the most meaningful way.
That is so powerful. And that also works with the way the younger generation consumes information. It's instant, it's right there, highly accessible. So that's incredible, having a bit of a cheat sheet, so to speak. So, question, let's talk about that younger generation and the work that you do. I'm really fascinated. So your organizations are nonpartisan, but you're also really bold about issues that should be addressed when citizens are looking to vote. How do you walk that tightrope?
Well, I don't know how much is necessarily a tightrope because we're not endorsing candidates, right? We're not. I'm saying, oh, this party is better than the other one. We're saying, here are the facts, First of all, I think there's this perception that young people are not aware of the issues. They are. I've been in high schools around the country talking to young people, and, the first thing when you ask them what issue do you care about the most is gun control, right? Because they know it's a life or death issue, but they understand, they know that climate change is coming fast, and they're the generation that's inheriting it, and they recognize how much the economy is affecting them and their lives. A huge reason that young people don't have IDs is because public schools don't offer driver's ed the way they used to. And a lot of students can't afford the hundreds of dollars of driver's ed. So all of these issues are very, very real to them and very immediate. And they, they've heard about voter suppression their whole lives. It's all over the news. So, for us, it's not that there is a partisan line we have to walk as much as, hey, here are the facts. This voter ID law is a thing that exists. And here's what it says, and here's who, the studies prove that it affects, and you're one of them because I'm looking at you right now and it's affecting you. And so let's talk about what that means and what you can do about it. And if we talk about the facts as they are, then whether people feel like they have a partisan bent or not, because maybe there's one party that's more active on, suppressing the vote than the other or not. The fact is, the facts are the facts. This law exists. Let's
Sure.
talk about what we can do about it.
Sure, absolutely. So, politics and pop culture. One of my favorite intersections, right? So, there's probably a group of people that say, you know what, let's keep the two separate. And celebrities, just do whatever you do in your little famous world and leave the rest of the thinking to the rest of us. So, there's that school of thought. But then also, Rock the Vote was launched at that intersection of politics and pop culture. And it's still a necessity now in a lot of ways. Tell me a little bit about why that intersection is effective for what you do.
Yeah, I think to me the idea that politics and pop culture should be separate is absurd. Like, the way that we consume media, the way that we interact with the world is reflected back to us in pop culture. So the idea that those individuals that are part of creating that art should take a step back and not make their voices heard feels like they're trying to censor people that are trying to create art, trying to send out messages. So just in general, that feels inaccurate. But also the idea that we need to have a culture around civic engagement so that it's normalized, so that you don't fully separate these conversations of, we don't talk about politics, we talk about light op, like, the weather and how your dog is doing. It's super important to have these conversations with people about these are the issues that matter to me. If we avoid those conversations, if we avoid I just want to hear happy things from these people that I like versus why they care about voting and how it impacts them, then we leave so many conversations unsaid, and we don't talk about it in a way that we can have real impact at the polls. So the way that we leverage influencers typically is to how can they use their platform to reach people that might not otherwise be engaged in politics, that might think it's something they don't want to talk about, that they don't feel moved by it, connecting with them through the issues that might mean something to that specific influencer. What do they care about? And then transitioning that into a conversation that means something to their people. So it isn't just, a PSA where a celebrity says go vote.
Sure.
That's not going to be impactful, and that's not necessarily the approach that we take anymore, because I think people are aware voting is happening, but it's why do you use voting as a mechanism to create change in your communities, and using influencers to kind of further that message by sharing meaningful stories for them.
Yeah, I would add one thing. One of the things that we constantly sort of say as voting rights orgs and in culture is they wouldn't be trying to suppress your vote if it didn't matter, right? One of the other things that we really have to look at when we're talking about the people who are trying to silence the people in pop culture is because they know how much it matters. So if you look back at McCarthy, which young people, millennials, go read about McCarthy. It's really important. One of the first things that he tried to do was silence voices in Hollywood, right? And he destroyed lives doing so. And it's something that you see in authoritarian governments all the time, is that they understand these are the people who are deciding what America, thinks and the world. They make our movies, they make our music, they make our television shows. Disney can either tell kids recycling is important or throw trash all over the ground, and they know how much it matters, which is why you see every time that a government comes into office that is not doing what's in the best will of the people or for the good of the people, one of the first things they try to do is silence the culture makers. And we know that's important, and we saw it happen. And we live in LA, we know a lot of people sort of in the film and TV industry, and they know, because it wasn't that long ago, what happened right here.
Right.
And there are people whose lives were decimated by McCarthy because he had to silence culture. So when they keep telling us, oh, celebrities should shut up, right? Or, oh, football players shouldn't kneel or whatever, it's because they know how influential and how important they are.
They know the impact. Oh my gosh. So what's really important to me is knowing your why. And we talked a lot about how people are being affected and how our nation is shifting with the work that you do. But talk to me about you. How did you get to this place? What's your why? Is there a story? Is there something that happened in your life that made you say, you know what? Not today, not on my watch. I am founding Spread the Vote. I am gonna be a director here at Rock the Vote, and we are making some changes. What's your personal why?
I'll go. For me, it is the core aspect of what makes our democracy work is one that participates, one that is informed and actually turns out to vote. Because turnout rates have been so poor, and especially the younger generation, like there is a downward spiral toward their turnout, just not actually ever making up what has been lost and what has been turned out by previous generations. So for me, I feel like our democracy is fully at stake, where if we aren't able to actually, in a meaningful way, engage this generation of voters who don't feel heard, who don't necessarily think that voting is a way to shape their communities, there is so much energy around them that they want to change how things are happening in the world, but they don't necessarily see voting as that mechanism. I'm really drawn to creating digital campaigns and making technology that makes it easier for them to cast a ballot, building relationships and partnerships that, bridges that gap between like them first being asked to participate to actually participating. Because if we don't act now, if we don't engage young people where they are through meaningful partnerships and influencers and technology, it's just, our democracy isn't going to work anymore. It's just going to be broken.
Yeah. Kat, what's your why?
Saving democracy as well. I mean, I think for me and for Spread the Vote, it's dual layered, right? Like one piece of it is that voter ID laws affect not only, we have the numbers to know that they affected the presidential election, but it takes very few votes to suppress or change the outcome of a local election, right? Because the margins of victories are so small. And sometimes, like often in, mayor's races, city council, even some state legislature races, they tie, right? And if not, depending on the size of your district or your town, it could be a couple dozen votes, a couple hundred, a couple thousand. And so when you're suppressing 200,000 votes in a small state, that's your elections, right? And so knowing that this very sort of clear and obvious and targeted form of voter suppression is out there, and that there's one way that we can help fix it that, we sort of looked at and no one else was. It's like, okay, you need an ID to vote, well, we'll just get you an ID. And then we'll drive you to the polls and we're done. Great, you voted. And then the other piece of that is that we know that at the same time that we're helping get the IDs and get, the people to the polls who are specifically being, targeted so that they can't vote, we're also helping them get the IDs that they need for their lives. For jobs, for housing, for medical care. And every single day we get people IDs who say, I can go apply for a job now, or I can sleep in a shelter now. Because a lot of shelters require IDs, before you can sleep there. A lot of food banks won't give you food without having an ID. So, the ID that we're helping people get every single day is changing their immediate lives, is changing the future for themselves and their children and their families, but it's also making a change at the polls. And so knowing that we get to have that impact and we get to help people make those changes in their lives and have their voices heard is literally why we get up every day.
I love that so much. How do we stay engaged and keep in touch with Rock the Vote and Spread the Vote? Midterms, it's here. Pretty much.
Yeah.
And you're working 24/7. So we're going to let you go back to running this marathon, and we will run alongside you. Just tell us where to go.
Yeah, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Rock the Vote. And if you also sign up for our, if you want to pledge to vote or sign up for election reminders, we will send you everything you need to cast a ballot. So we'll have the voter guides. It has office descriptions, down ballot information, where you vote, if you can vote early, how to get an absentee ballot. And if you need an ID, we'll definitely send you to Spread the Vote.
And Rock the Vote has a tool. I can't tell you how many people I said this to, and I have to shout it out.
Yes.
If you go on your state page on Rock the Vote, they will tell you what voting issues need to be battled in your state. So for instance, only 13 states, 12 states in the District of Columbia actually have automatic voter registration. So if your state doesn't have AVR, then they'll tell you that and how to get involved. Or if you, need your state to extend voter registration to, 16-year-olds or whatever. And so it's a really good way for you to see, in my state, every single state, there's not a single state that has figured out voting. Minnesota is the closest, shout out to Minnesota. But like everyone else, there is an issue that you can work on to expand voting rights in your state, and Rock the Vote will tell you how to do that. So shout out to Rock the Vote. For us, you can go to spreadthevote.org, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We're Spread the Vote US. And if you need an ID or you know someone who does, you can call or text us at 323-694-0738.
Kat Calvin, founder of Spread the Vote, Jen Tolentino, Director of Policy and Civic Tech. Rock the vote. Changing seriously our country, which shifts the world. This is not hyperbolic. Thank you for being here. I love meeting superheroes, so I'm really feeling pretty good today on Zakia Larry Live. Thank you so much for your time, ladies.
Thank you.
My pleasure. So this has been a phenomenal show from Los Angeles, and I am having a phenomenal time. Now, I keep threatening myself with a good time. I said I'm gonna go hang out and cut a rug. I'm really just gonna go eat. So, if I gotta be honest. So, let me give you your 1 minute elevate. The midterm elections are right here. It's time for you to rock your vote. It's time for you to spread your vote. It's time for you to recognize something, do the research to make sure that your facts are in order, and spread your word and spread your own truth. You have a voice, and that voice is needed. And we've even seen that your voice and vote counts down to the very individual that you are. Oh, you matter. And so if you ever think that you just have one skill set that only applies in one area and that you're not making an impact, I hope you saw today that that is far from the truth. Now, find your core, identify your why, and then find a way to live out your truth in a way that serves you and the people around you. Please like, comment, and share this show, and make sure you stay tuned to ZakiaLarryLive.tv for more real life, real talk, real change. Now, I'm about to go have some real fun in real LA and have a real dinner. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in my day here in LA, and I will see you next episode. It's Zakia Larry Live.
Zakia